and gentlemen, welcome to the Nutrition Hero Podcast. Igniting both the art and the science of functional medicine. Here's your host, Dr. Brad Watts.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Nutrition Hero Podcast. Dr. Brad Watts with you here in the podcast lab. I am pleased to be here today, and I hope you are as well. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate all of our new subscribers, those people that have been hitting 5-star reviews, the subscribe button on iTunes, Stitcher, however you get your media. Hey, even those of you that have been hitting subscribe and thumbs up on YouTube, we appreciate you too. So, thanks for being along for the ride. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the current events that we find just in healthcare in general. And what I want to do is put the functional medicine glasses on, and I want to get that viewpoint out front and center so that you can start seeing things through the lens of functional medicine. And so the lens of functional medicine is really a lens of health and healing on your own, right? And personal agency in health, that's really what we're looking for. So today we're going to talk about that as it relates to Alzheimer's disease, Omega3s. I think we did a podcast recently on Alzheimer's disease, but this is going to further the viewpoint, and you'll see why here in a minute. So anyway, cruising around on Medscape, came across a neurology article, an interview really between two providers, one a researcher and one somebody who basically produces commentary. Now, when we look at Alzheimer's disease, remember, modern medicine looks at it as a pathology. Modern medicine looks at it as something that needs to be overcome from a chemical nature. We basically have these proteins called amyloid proteins that show up in the brain, which is a hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. And these amyloid proteins are thought to be causative of Alzheimer's disease. Causative. When in reality, the medical literature coming out of UCLA is early as 2014-15, showing that those amyloid plaques are a protective mechanism where the brain is trying to protect itself from being flogged constantly by your lifestyle. Because remember that chronic disease, even Alzheimer's disease, is genetics plus lifestyle gives you your chronic health outcomes. I say it often, but if you understand that equation, genetics plus lifestyle gives you your chronic health outcomes, you're going to know more than 90% of the physicians on the planet. They just don't understand it, right? They get caught looking at a tree in the middle of the forest trying to describe the forest, and they can't do it, right? They can't do it. So anyway, in this instance, the article is titled Omega3s to Prevent Alzheimer's Disease. Who benefits from this, right? Omega3s to prevent Alzheimer's, who benefits? And so you have a transcript of an interview basically between a guy named Dr. Richard Isaacson and somebody named Dr. Hussein Yassin. And in this instance, what we want to do is understand the mechanism that they're describing. Okay, so up until recent, people are still arguing over the beneficial effects of Omega3s. They're arguing over the beneficial effects from a neurologic perspective because in reality the brain requires very little omega-3, right, in order to maintain its health. Now when we say health in modern medicine, we're talking about being included in 96% of the population. Disease or lack of health would be outside of the laboratory range on a blood chemistry, is going to be the outside 2 or 3% on either end. So 94 to 96% is going to be considered normal lab range. Okay, so get that. So in order for you to be considered healthy by modern medicine, you just have to fit in with 94 to 96% of the population. That's not real hard. Okay, not real hard. In order to be considered sick or missing your health, you have to fit outside of that 94 to 96%. So you're in the 4 to 6% that are consistently being treated, air quotes, okay? Now, when we look at this from the perspective of normal function, recognize that's where research is coming from. Recognize that's where research is coming from. So let me put this a different way. 96% of the population needs very little omega-3 support to have normal neurologic function. Okay, let me say that a different way. 96% of the population doesn't need omega-3s in order to stay in the group with the rest of the 96% of the population. Okay, so I know it gets a little convoluted talking like that, but I want you to see this for what it actually is. Okay, so I'm going to read a couple of parts here from this doctor. Quote, "There's been a very consistent association between omega-3 intake and the incidence of Alzheimer's disease. It's not just in the US, but in many different cohorts in Europe as well. We're talking about a large number where lower levels of omega-3s are associated with an increased risk for Alzheimer's disease." Okay, so they start out by saying there's a correlation. We know that the human body cannot efficiently make omega-3s. They don't have the enzymes to do so, right? So we know that. We also know, based off of scans, that the brain needs a very tiny amount of omega-3s to keep going. Okay, so remember, your body is wired for longevity. It's not wired, right, for comfort. Your body's wired for longevity. It's not wired for comfort. Case in point, somebody who has Alzheimer's disease might live 20 years with their brain deteriorating, right? Their quality of life is terrible, right? But their body just won't die, right? Because your body's wired for longevity. It's wired for survival. It's not wired for comfort. It's not wired for quality of life. We'll just say that. All right, so getting back, it says we also know that the brain needs a very tiny amount of omega-3s to keep going. This is the adult human brain, unlike the baby brain, which needs more. The brain needs about 3 milligrams per day, which is a tiny amount. The question is, this is continuing the quote here, the question is there a relationship with omega-3 intake that we could use to prevent or stop Alzheimer's disease? Our studies have shown that yes, there is. However, the relationship is not a one-size-fits-all. Not everybody's going to benefit from supplementation. Okay? Here's what they are admitting, blatantly admitting. There's more than one cause to Alzheimer's disease. Right? This gentleman, a researcher on omega-3s, telling you that there's more than one cause to Alzheimer's disease, right? Which is why there's some people are going to get value out of omega-3 fish oils in prevention, and others will not. Right? Others will not. Contrast that with the Alzheimer's industry. What are they looking at right now? One size fits all, a treatment approach. It's crazy. Treatment approach, that's one size fits all. One medication's going to patch all the different holes in the roof, and it ain't going to happen. Okay? But this guy, a little different. He's got a different perspective, which I appreciate. Okay? So it goes on to talk about 5 to 6 million Americans have Alzheimer's disease currently. The people who are going to benefit, if you're a listener to this podcast, you're going to know about this, okay? Who are the people that might get Alzheimer's disease and benefit from omega-3s? Right? The people that have APOE4 genetic predispositions. Okay? People who carry the genetic code for Alzheimer's disease. People who carry one allele. So remember with DNA you have two copies. People who carry one copy of APOE4 have a 4-fold increase in the risk for Alzheimer's disease, and people who have a double copy, approximately a 12-fold increased risk, compared to normal, air quotes, normal. See, this is interesting. We've talked about APOE4 in the past, and remember that APOE4 status, and you can find this stuff out on your 23andMe, for crying out loud, okay? It's not a secret. Your APOE4 status, okay, if you have APOE4 positive, what that does is it sets you up to be a producer of inflammation. Remember, APOE4 has increased NF-kappa beta activity. NF-kappa beta is like a light switch on the outside of a cell, right? You have a light switch on the outside of the cell that when it gets flipped on, that sends a signal to the nucleus of the cell that tells NF-kappa beta, nuclear factor kappa beta, to get irritated. Time to be upset, right? Time to be in outrage mode. And we start creating a whole bunch of cytokine response, inflammation, etc. and it tells the cell next door, hey, you, time to be upset. All right, I'm upset. You should be upset with me. And so what happens, NF-kappa beta now is playing the telephone game. We start seeing the spread of inflammation. Well, if you have APOE4 genetic predispositions here for inflammation, you are going to be driving that at a higher rate than average. Higher rate than average. Okay, so get this. When we look at using omega-3s to prevent Alzheimer's disease, all they're talking about is using omega-3s to be anti-inflammatory. Why? Because Alzheimer's disease is the result of the brain having like enough, right? Throwing in the towel when it comes to inflammation. The same way that if you're sitting next to me and you punch me in the shoulder enough times, what am I going to do? Move, right? I'm going to retract myself from sitting next to you. I'm going to defend myself. How am I going to do that? I'm going to get into a protective stance. Well, when your brain gets into a protective stance, or a defensive stance rather, when your brain does that, what does it do? It changes volume. It starts to shrink. We start to develop plaques, amyloid. Right? This is what we're talking about here. So, omega-3 fish oil, beneficial for those that have APOE4 status, strictly because it's anti-inflammatory. That's amazing. So what they're saying is that people, okay, that have Alzheimer's disease but don't have APOE4 status, right? What if it's not inflammation from their genetics that's causing it? What would that mean is a cause? Lifestyle, right? Almost like genetics plus lifestyle give you your chronic health outcomes, okay? All right, so this guy goes on to say, we tracked APOE4 carriers, and our study suggests that if you catch an APOE4 carrier early before they have any disease, we have evidence that the brain is using a lot of omega-3. Why? Because it's trying not to be on fire. This means that the brain is pulling omega-3s from blood plasma. There's no evidence of cognitive decline yet, and we think this APOE4 brain is going to run into trouble if levels of omega-3 in the plasma are low over time. Well, yeah, if you're trying to put out a fire and you run out of water, you're in trouble, right? That's what we're talking about here. So the implications that are that younger APOE4 carriers who do not have enough omega-3 intake have a higher risk of developing cognitive decline. Yep. It's amazing. You got to study this rather than understanding the connections through physiology. It's like, sometimes I almost think like you throw a ball in the air and modern medicine isn't going to believe that it's going to come down unless they have, a cohort study of 1,000 baseballs that got thrown in the air, right? Anyway, it's shocking to me, is what I'm trying to say. So, all right, where are we here? All right, should an APOE4 carrier go and get omega-3 supplement from the store, and would that be okay? Right? That's the question. If I have APOE4, should I be using omega-3? Right? They go on to talk in great detail about it, but here's the summary. Okay? Supplements are all diverse. Some of them are bad. Some of them are great. We don't exactly know what dose is going to be effective for these patients. We don't exactly know how long to give omega-3s to these patients. Okay? This is the summary. Right? This is crazy town. This is crazy. If we use anti-inflammatory supplements, is that going to translate into lower cognitive decline rates? Quote, that's a great question. We don't have the answer to that yet. I think the answer is not to throw the omega-3 into the bin, but rather to do more research to figure this out. There is really good signal that needs to be refined in better trials and more tailored to specific populations. Okay? What they're saying is that, well, we see all the baseballs laying in the grass right now, but we got to study that again. Why? Effectiveness, control. Remember, you guys, science only knows what it's paid to know. Who's funding research for omega-3s? There's no research. There's no money in omega-3 fish oil for pharmaceutical industry when there are 1,000 brands of fish oil right on the market right now, on Amazon. There's no money in it, so they're never going to research. It's not going to happen. It's only going to happen out of government grants coming out of universities. Okay, that's the only way this is going to take place. So, anyway, they continue. We have to be cautiously optimistic. More research is definitely needed. You can get omega-3s from fatty fish like wild salmon, which is likely better than farm-raised, mackerel, albacore, tuna, sardines, etc. You almost can't eat enough sardines because they're very brain healthy. Okay? Don't take omega-3s, but eat sardines. Okay. There are many different types of fatty fish out there. You can also get omega-3s in a prescription or potentially through a supplement. It has to be a one-on-one discussion with the physician and the patient. Okay, so what they're basically doing is not committing that the omega-3s might be a way forward for patients that have APOE4 status, okay, because they need to have studies that have basically been in longer periods of time. I'm telling you, you're not going to see it. And if you do see it, it's going to be like 25 years down the road. Okay? So right now, what you would make of this from a functional medicine perspective is just follow the physiology. Follow the physiology. It is well documented that APOE4 status has increased inflammatory loads. If you allow that increased inflammatory load 30 years, right, to basically destroy the brain, of course you're going to have 4-fold or 12-fold risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Of course, that's the nature of that issue. Okay? But it doesn't mean you have to let it take its life cycle and then be like, oh, maybe you should use omega-3s now that you can't ever find your keys, right? Or that you forgot where the grocery store was, or that you can't remember your grandkids' names. I'm telling you that lifestyle, a little bit early on goes a long way in the long run. A little bit early on goes a long way in the long run. It's amazing. This is stunning to me. Okay? Absolutely stunning. So when we look at omega-3 fish oils, can you get crappy omega-3s? Yes. Can you get amazing omega-3s? Yes. Right? That is what we should be studying. How to label a good source and a bad source. Not how to label, is it going to be beneficial for your brain or not? Okay? I think we know the answer to this already. There's been piles and piles of research on NF-kappa beta and APOA3 because they're looking for a drug to deactivate them. Looking for a drug to deactivate them. The problem is that they don't just cause damaging inflammation, NF-kappa beta. You also need NF-kappa beta, to live a normal, healthy life. And so maybe we can do that one in a podcast later on. But this is where we talk about using food rather than a pharmaceutical. What food does is food comes alongside and enhances, right, works with, modulates. It supports. It's a building block. Omega-3 can be looked at as any of those descriptive terms. When we talk about pharmaceuticals, what we're talking about is downregulating, blocking, inhibiting, and decreasing function of a certain pathway in the body. Well, we don't want to do that. We don't want to replace something that is dysfunctioning in the body. We want to understand why is it dysfunctioning and then support that why. Okay? Again, same question. If you're sitting next to me punching me in the shoulder, why is Brad moving away from me? Right? Because I'm punching him in the shoulder. Maybe stop punching me if you don't want me to move away. Right? Same thing with the brain. If the brain starts to retract and is moving away from your lifestyle, maybe we should ask the question, why? Rather than, oh, it's your genetics. Okay? No, it's not. It's your genetics and your lifestyle. One of those is going to change. All right. Good luck, right? Good luck. So anyway, when we look at this strategy that's out there right now, remember, medicine only knows, science only knows what it's paid to know. There is a bunch of research going on trying to combat the opioid epidemic. Right? You know how billions and billions and billions of dollars have been made in the marketplace on things like opioids, like Oxycontin. Okay? No surprise. And in the last, not necessarily this year, right, because not a lot of media attention on it because the rest of the world's on fire, but last year, even into 2018 and 17, you started to see this huge outcry from the population in the United States that was like, what are we going to do about this? People are dying from addiction to opioids, destroying their life. Right? Remember some of the stats that I shared on the podcast previously? 80% of heroin users in the United States started out on opioid medications. So they showed up for the pain control but ended up staying for the smiles, right? And when they can't get the prescription anymore, where do they go? Right? Well, when we look at opioids, you consider it like pharmaceutical grade heroin. When we look at that, where do you go after you can't get any more prescriptions? To the streets? To the streets. And so 80% of heroin users in the U.S. started out on a pharmaceutical situation. What are we talking about here? I'm talking about the same stinking mechanism that we just talked about with Alzheimer's disease. Okay? APOE4 status, NF-kappa beta activity, driving chronic pain syndromes, right? This is the chronic situation, not from an injury. Okay? This is a different scenario. This is lifestyle-induced inflammatory damage. That's what I'm talking about here. Okay, so just interesting. Anyway, the opioid world was on fire in the most recent 2 or 3 years. When we look at what the government's been asking these companies, pharmaceutical companies, to do, right? One of the things that we found out is that 20 years ago, when these drugs came into the marketplace, like Oxycontin, the manufacturers knew how addictive they were. They knew it, right? And this has come out. This has come out in the lawsuits. They knew how addictive these medications were to patients, but they covered it up. Interesting. Okay, so what's the government do? You got all these people addicted to this stuff, and they're very effective at controlling pain, right? Don't get me wrong. Very effective. The government says in some new legislation, right? It's time for you to figure out a way to make these effective medications less addictive. Right? There's some of the medical studies that show that after 3 doses, you can actually have a chemical dependency. Not an emotional dependency like I'm addicted to being out of pain. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like my brain will not function appropriately without it. 3 doses. That's amazing. Powerful and amazing. All right, so here's an article from Medscape. Reworked Oxycontin fails to cut overall opioid abuse, FDA panel says. Oh, you think? Right? Part of me thinks that researchers and the people that are developing these medications and bringing them to the market on behalf of these companies, I'm not a total cynic, right? Part of me thinks that they're trying to help people, right? But they're not out there, I don't think, okay, saying, how can we get as many people addicted to this as possible? Because if they were, you'd be addicted to your Lipitor right now, right? You'd be like chemically addicted to it. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. A little sprinkle of Oxycontin mixed with your Lipitor. That's what would be happening. Okay, but nonetheless, we're looking at this pain medication, Oxycontin, and the government says, figure out how to make it less addictive. And so we have Purdue Pharma, okay, received mixed reviews from a U.S. Food Drug Administration Joint Advisory Committee. Okay, why did they receive mixed reviews? Here's what they found out. Right? The updated formulation for Oxycontin incorporates something called a polyethylene oxide, PEO, an inactive polymer that makes the tablet harder and more crush resistant. And the tablet turns into a gel or blue-like substance when wet. The new formulation is bioequivalent to the original formulation, so there's no additional clinical efficacy. Safety studies were conducted. At the FDA's request, the company carried out 4 post-marketing studies, which the FDA also reviewed. Okay, so they added a polymer to it, likely to control the chemical nature of how much of the capsule actually dissolves, right? Also to control how fast it works. Okay, so a national addictions intervention prevention program included 66,000 participants undergoing evaluation for substance use, or entering opioid addiction program. Okay, 66,000. That's like 3 times the size of the city I grew up in, right? And these are just people that opted for substance or opioid addiction programming. This is amazing, okay? Results showed a drop in up to 52% of self-reported past 30-day Oxycontin injections, snorting, and or comparables, including extended release morphine, right? So 52% drop in self-reported over the course of a month, okay? An analysis of 300,000 calls to U.S. poison centers showing a reduction of up to 28% calls for regarding Oxycontin exposure, okay? So 308,000 calls to U.S. poison control centers. That's an amazing stat, by the way. 28% fewer calls regarding Oxycontin. Okay, the FDA analysis concluded it is unclear whether the decline was attributable to the drug's reformulation or co-occurring trends. Like what? COVID, lockdown. What in the world? All right, so here's another one. A study of 63,000 individuals entering methadone clinics treatment programs. 63,000. Again, people entering methadone treatment. My goodness. Reduction of up to 27% in Oxycontin abuse versus comparables. Right? The FDA analysis determined the results were mixed and didn't provide compelling evidence that the reformulation did anything. You guys, here's what's going on. Pharmaceutical company gets slapped on the wrist. Right? Remember, they baked all of these lawsuits into the cake, into the business plan in the beginning. Right? We're going to get sued, just like Philip Morris did with cigarettes in the 80s. Okay? We know it's addictive. We're going to put all these other chemicals in it to make sure that you're addicted, is what Philip Morris did. And then we're going to just make sure we save enough money to pay off all of these lawsuits later on down the road. Pharmaceutical industry is like, hey, that's a good model. Let's do the same thing. So here's what's happening. Pain medication, they know is addictive. They covered up that indicator, okay, in the research and started publishing it to the doctors in the 80s and said, oh, we don't know if it's addictive or not, but it definitely takes away pain. And so the doctors start giving this stuff out like Skittles, and we end up in a position now where Oxycontin is the manufacturer, Purdue Pharma, is being forced, right, to reformulate to try to curb the addictiveness. And so the government slaps them on the wrist, all right, and Purdue's like, oh, okay, yeah, we won't do that again. Let's see if we can come up with another formula. With a huge smile on their face, they come back with the information that says, looks like we tried, but we failed, right? We tried, but we failed. Okay? Oh, shucks. What are we going to do about that? What are we going to do? Okay? The reformulated drug, this is the summary here. The reformulated drug is not going to solve the U.S. opioid epidemic, which requires a multifaceted approach. The opioid crisis has resulted in a skyrocketing of deaths linked to tremendously potent forms of fentanyl, emerging stimulant uses, because remember, you show up for the pain relief and you stay for the smiles, and a possible increase in drug overdoses linked to COVID-19. You think? So you have all of this traffic decreasing in all of these treatment facilities. Well, yeah, traffic's decreased in a hospital. Why would it not decrease in a treatment facility because of COVID-19? Okay? You have people that are unwilling to call poison control centers, right, to the same extent that they were. Obviously, you're being freaked out of your mind and told to stay in your house, and now it's just you and your addiction living together for 90 days with no patient interaction or no personal interaction. What do you think is going to happen? Right? So, anyway, all of this to say that from a functional perspective and from just a human perspective, modern medicine is standing here like saying, how do we put out this fire that we caused? Right? And the people that are causing the fire are standing there smiling going, well, we tried and we couldn't make it any smaller. Right? It's just amazing. Just amazing. So, anyway, when we look at how do these patients move forward, okay, whether it's chronic inflammation leading to Alzheimer's disease or chronic inflammation leading to Oxycontin addiction because we don't know how to control pain other than to just numb the nerves. When we look at this, don't ever forget that it's genetics and lifestyle. It's genetics and lifestyle. The reason we know that your lifestyle can make or break Alzheimer's or make and break opioid addiction is because what's the first place that medicine goes when you're in chronic pain or when you have Alzheimer's disease? Your lifestyle. They add to your lifestyle. What are they adding? A medication. That should tell you all you need to know. If adding a medication to my lifestyle will change a chronic outcome, my experience of pain, where do you think you should be focused? On your lifestyle. We just haven't been equipped to do that as a population. We haven't been equipped. But it's changing. Right? It's changing because people like you are listening to the podcast and doing something about it. You're taking care of your own health. Okay? So always remember, lifestyle, genetics, chronic health outcomes. You see it in the news, as we just talked about today. You see it in the research, as we talked about in podcasts past. Right? See it in your own health. That's where you want to see it. So, all right. Thank you, everybody, for listening to today's podcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.